Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. I'm coming to you from very rainy Oxford as usual. Hi, everyone. My name is Balogun. I'm an entrepreneur and currently a student at Oxford Said Business School. I am so pleased to be here today. Today, we're going to talk about something very important to me, very integral to my identity, and very integral to the future economic prosperity of Africa. So, we're going to examine the hustle, the entrepreneurship, the spirit, the drive that keeps us alive in the continent, and the entrepreneurship ecosystems. Like, how can they lead us to economic prosperity? Today, I am joined by three very brilliant panelists. First off, we have Tosin Faniro-Dada. She's the managing director and CEO of Endeavor Nigeria. She's passionate about supporting entrepreneurs and helping them scale. She's a very qualified accountant, and she's not only interested in the immediate impact that organizations have, but more about the multiplier effect on the larger society and economy. I'm also joined by Rue Rogers. Rue is the CEO, thank you, of Founder Factory Africa. He's a serial entrepreneur and business leader, and he has a very unique perspective and human-centered and creative approach to delivering ventures at scale. He's created three of his own businesses and scaled them, and his approach has brought success in Silicon Valley as well as markets in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kenya, and Rwanda. So we're so pleased to have Rue here today. And then last but definitely not the least, we also have Benjamin. Benjamin Fernandez is the CEO of Nala and founder. He's a Tanzanian award-winning speaker and entrepreneur of one of East Africa's largest consumer fintech companies. Unfortunately, our last speaker for today, Anita, was unable to join us. But we hope to have a very lively and amazing session today. So let's get right into it. I'm sure everyone is so excited. So first off, I'm going to start off with Benjamin. Benjamin, you were once in our shoes. You were once an MBA student, and I'm sure you went for all the classes, listening attentively, writing everything down. I'm assuming you're a good student. So I would say that what do we need beyond theory? You know, it's one thing to read about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and then to be an entrepreneur in Africa. But tell us the real deal, Benjamin. Like what don't classrooms tell us? What don't professors tell us?
Thank you all so much, first of all, for inviting me. Greetings from Dar es Salaam, Mambo VP, to all the fellow East Africans tuning in. And good morning, good evening, wherever you are. As Ink mentioned, my name is Benjamin. I'm Tanzanian, and I went to business school. To be honest, for me, business school was more like just vibes. So I got there. I really didn't know what like a lot of stuff was. To be completely frank, I used to be a TV host in Tanzania, so I didn't do anything in tech. A little bit of tech with payments. So we were trying to figure out how to pay for people to pay for TV subscription through mobile money, and so that was like a project I got to work on back in 2011. But when I got to business school, this whole world of VC and Series A, Series B, I was like, yo, we're learning the alphabet backwards again. And so I was definitely a fish out of the water in classes there. And so when I never thought I'd get into entrepreneurship at all after business school, literally when I said just vibes, it was literally just vibes. I was at all events, the hype man, you know, just enjoying myself. But coming back home, you know, which we can talk about separately, but, you know, I think some of the biggest lessons learned over here on the ground is, I think a lot of us African entrepreneurs on the ground are often over mentored and underfunded. And, you know, with the over mentorship piece, a lot of it is coming from people, let's say in Europe, people in the States coming to mentor people out here. And there are market dynamics that simply don't apply at all. There is, I see Rue shaking his head as well, because like I completely think that there's so many things in a lot of programs that are completely flawed and broken. I think what becomes extremely valuable is when you bring somebody, let's say, who's a product expert, maybe from the Valley or from Europe, and tie them up with somebody who's built something on the ground locally and have a discussion with them too. I think there's massive unique insights you can gain Rules aren't followed all the time, which makes it difficult and makes it tricky. Being able to navigate and following things properly. If you haven't been yelled at the center by a central bank before and you work in fintech, that is a miracle because that will never happen. I think we've been to the central bank, I think like 16 times in 3 years, and a lot of exchanged words back and forth, and those are things that when policies aren't as clear, or when you have a lot of governments that aren't used to fintech companies building certain unique products in the market, you're doing half of the teaching as well as trying to get them to approve policy for you, right, to do what you're trying to do. And that's where it becomes difficult. And so I think there are micro dynamics that are very tricky, and finding people who are experts in the industry to help guide you through, I think would be a foundational focus. If I were to do it again, I'd try to find mentors in the space, which is not always available.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Benjamin. Before I go on to the next question, Tosin, Rue, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Certainly. I mean, first of all, I think I'm very privileged to be here, so thank you for having me. And second of all, I'm very aware, Benjamin, I couldn't agree with you more about I'm a humble tourist in the beautiful continent of Africa, and I have very little to teach, but a lot to enable, and that is my role. And I'm very clear about that. Because I have seen a lot of people come from Western countries thinking that they've made $1 billion here or 100 million there, thinking we have so much to tell local African entrepreneurs. And I just think that's bad advice and it's bad practice. So we set up locally, we are led locally, we are based in Johannesburg and also, of course, have presence in Nigeria and Kenya. And the question of how do we choose and scale businesses is an interesting one. I think you can't really answer that question without sort of being very honest about the market dynamics of Africa. And I think, of course, the very first place to start is every country has its own market dynamics. And so we are absolutely focused on entrepreneurs who understand those dynamics. So we only recruit locally. So if you're an entrepreneur and you've grown up in Lagos or you've grown up in Nairobi, you don't look at your ecosystem and say, oh my God, it's so complicated or so regulatorily unfair or I don't understand it. You just grow up and you say, this is my world. I understand the way the banking culture works and I understand the way the finance sector works. And I know how to go knock on the door of the central bank. It's not easy, but I understand it. And we think that is a huge advantage to any entrepreneur. So we have an enormous bias towards entrepreneurs who are local and contextual to the markets that they're building. And we are entrepreneur-led, so we invest at the seed stage. We invest at the stage where businesses don't have that much data. And because they don't have much data, most institutional investors are scared of them. But really, we are human-centric. So we look for entrepreneurs that that have talent, that have understanding about their market, that have maybe some experience, but most of all show empathy in the way they handle the questions at the investment committee and are willing to adjust and pivot and make changes or not, right? And have a very clear vision. And the data comes second. Right, and so your performance at seed stage matters less to us than what kind of personality, what kind of attitude, what kind of leader you are as an entrepreneur.
Wow, thank you so much, Rue. You said it all really. People need to have an innate perseverance and understanding of the market in order to move things ahead. Tosin, I would really love your take on what does it take to really scale in Africa.
Thank you, Ink. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you live from Lagos. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Really excited to be here and well done to the team for putting this together. And I'm really just going to echo what Rue and Benjamin just said and talk about the market dynamics. And I'll use Nigeria as an example. Everyone is so quick to say we have 200 million people. But it's very important that you understand the dynamics of that 200 million people. It's very important that you understand that the bulk of that 200 million people are perhaps the informal sector. And so when you're coming up with this product and you're thinking about marketing this product to the country, it's not really plug and play, meaning you can't really just bring something from Silicon Valley, for instance, and just think you can bring it into the market and then you just plug and play. You have to be very sensitive to the market dynamics. You have to be very sensitive to the culture. You have to be very sensitive to how the country does business, for instance. Is it a relationship-based country? Is it a trust-based country? And little things like that make a whole lot of difference when you're trying to sign partnerships and when you're trying to introduce your products to locals.
So Tosin, do you want to brag on any of the companies you work with? Do you know someone who's done that well recently? Maybe a case study that we can look up to and Google later on and learn from?
Yeah, a lot of, and I don't want them to get jealous. So it would be difficult to just name one. You know, but at Endeavor, we work with a ton of companies. We currently have a portfolio of about 10 companies, and we have the likes of Flutterwave in our portfolio. We have the likes of 54 Gene, Paga, Carbon, AutoCheck, and a host of others. And in terms of the services that we provide, you know, we're led by entrepreneurs as well. We're the leading global community for high impact entrepreneurs. And it's really to just understand their challenges and to help them scale. And these challenges could be from anything. It could be access to market, for instance. If an entrepreneur is looking to expand to another country, sometimes they don't know where to start from because the information is just not there. And the access isn't there as well. So if you're an entrepreneur in Nigeria and you want to scale to Kenya, you know, where do you start from if you're not in the right network or if you don't have access to people in that market? And another thing is capital. And Nala had talked about capital, that we're over mentored and underfunded. And I absolutely agree with him. In my former life, I was working with early stage startups, and I believed that the huge gap was for funding for early stage startups not having enough capital. But now that I'm working with scale ups, I realize that there's a gap there as well. So there are gaps everywhere. And it seems now that once you raise Series A, for you to get to BC, you know, you then struggle. And then because the capital is not in Africa and the capital is outside Africa, you then have to meet all those investors, and some of them don't know the market, and some of them don't understand why you're doing things the way you're doing things. When in developed countries, they're already like far ahead. And then you have to explain to them your market and explain to them your culture and explain to them your dynamics. And it takes longer than it should. So capital absolutely is one of our challenges, and we are underfunded, like Rue and Nala said. And talent as well. We've been seeing a lot of challenges in talent, especially as companies scale, especially as they become high growth, and just hiring the best talent. Everybody is always saying that I'm looking for a CTO, I'm looking for a CEO, I'm always looking for someone. And then when you then think about Nigeria and we talk about unemployment, and we say we have so many young people that don't have jobs. However, all these high growth companies are saying they're looking for XYZ and they can't find these people in that market. It then tells you that there's another gap in terms of how we're upskilling and training people for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future.
Well, you raised such heavy points. Oh, sorry, Rue, I see you want to add something.
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise heavy points.
Don't get me heavy.
I didn't mean to make everyone sad.
No, it's an important topic.
Put out the reality on ground.
So I completely agree. We don't provide any advice or mentorship. That's not what we do. And I think it's an easy thing to do. It's a very egocentric thing to do, and ultimately it's very cheap, which is why everybody likes to do it. But I also think, and I think what's interesting is to all the sort of my peers who are investors out there, or both future and present, I think that while we look to our entrepreneurs to know our markets, we look to ourselves to know the ecosystem. And I think money is a very blunt instrument, which is not to say that services and in-kind support, which we do deliver, is the solution. But it is to say that when you look at the market as a whole as an investor, you need to see where the gaps are, right? And the biggest challenge in Africa, in my opinion, is not capital, it's the coordination of capital. And when you look at an entrepreneur's journey and you look at my own experience of being an entrepreneur, if you are successful, your next investment and your next round is guaranteed. There is just no doubt where that's going to come from. In fact, you'll be oversubscribed. In Africa, I think there's a really interesting context where you can be successful, especially in the early stages, and need a bridging round either from concept stage to seed stage or seed stage to Series A. And in those bridging rounds, there's just no money, right? And the problem with that is that capital is being allocated in an uncoordinated way. It's prioritizing de-risked opportunity later stage, especially in private equity. And what's needed is somebody, whether it's a sort of a large venture capital group, a government, and a university, but what's needed is somebody in market to coordinate an entrepreneur's journey and think about what happens before they enter your investment thesis and afterwards. And unfortunately, I don't think our own governments, you know, UKAID and CDC and IFCs, they don't coordinate either, right? And if you look at the miracles of the Indian and the Chinese and the US economies, they came about through really heavy government subsidization and government coordination. Coordination is really important, you know, figuring out where there's a lack of capital and then figuring out how to de-risk that space. So I just, you know, from an investment point of view, I think it's up to the entrepreneur to know their market. It's up to us to know which entrepreneurs do. But then it's up to us to think about what happens to that journey before and afterwards. And I think that's the challenge.
Rue, thank you for raising the important points about the role government plays. Now, Benjamin, I know, especially being in fintech, you talked about going to the central bank. I mean, I know all the probably the conversations you must have with them, the push and pull, the constant regulations. Unfortunately, in Africa, I can give an example for Nigeria, for example. In the motorcycle industry, they made a legislation and that just wiped out some businesses overnight. They had to pivot. So how do you stay agile when the government can just wake up and, you know, make up decisions?
Yeah, it is hard. You know, similar in Nigeria with the crypto ban recently, right? So with all the tech startups doing crypto, and then like boom, you have this issuance of this letter that's get issued on a Friday afternoon, and all these startups have to pivot to move to P2P or other things. It is difficult. I also want to say more recently, I want to give some of the governments some credit here, because I know a lot of us founders often go off at them all the time and in our discussions. But I think in some countries, there have been some positive strides taken by some of the governments where, you know, they are inviting some people forward. Uganda recently just issued like a payments act for fintech companies, which is amazing, that went into place at the end of April this year. So, you know, you see governments start to really push on that. And like the central bank in Uganda, I just came from Uganda last night. The central bank in Uganda has been really forward about wanting more and more fintech companies in the region, because they see the benefit to their ecosystem when these fintech companies can operate successfully there. They also have a sandbox repo. So on the positive side, I think some governments are looking at things in the right way, are looking to be you know, as they start to see more and more countries become quote unquote successful and more stories popping up, you know, some of the governments like, okay, hey, that could be potential tax money we could be earning locally. What aren't we doing to do that? I know in East Africa, Tanzania doesn't have the best reputation on, you know, regulation. And that's been hard for us. And we face some of those challenges as well. But for example, this year, Tanzania launched an ICT commission for the first time ever, right? And so I'm seeing some positive strides getting taken place. It's never been easier to start the company in Eastern Africa in tech, but it's also really hard because imagine the people 5 years ago who didn't have any of these policies trying to do similar stuff to what we're doing today. It was probably way harder for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about that, how do we pave the way? You know, Benjamin, you touched on it, and I would love to hear from anyone their opinion. You know, in Africa, there's this belief, even more than in the Western world, that who you know is very important. So how do you make those connections? How do you make those mentorships? Where do we start from?
I have a quick thought on this one, because I remember being a student. So I went to grad school in the States, and when I was finishing grad school, it was either I go work at a place or, you know, move back home. And personally, I wanted to move back home to try to build something. I never knew I was going to start a company immediately when I moved back home, and I had all of these conversations with a lot of classmates, a lot of peers. You know, for example, within East Africa, if you studied abroad within, let's say, Tanzania, you're in the most privileged 1% of the population. In Kenya, it's like 1.3%. In Uganda, it's like 0.8%, right? So naturally, a lot of people maybe who might even be tuning in watching this, you know, whether you like it or not, factually, statistically, we are privileged. I was at Stanford GSB on an Africa MBA fellowship. It was a full, covered my tuition and housing to go there. And I had to recognize that as a privilege, right? Obviously, looking at going back home, I'm like, wow, look at the trade-offs, like income trade-offs, looking at like, okay, what I could potentially earn in the US versus back home. These are discussions I used to have with my classmates as well. I think 13 Africans in my class. I was the only one who moved back home right after business school. And what really pushed me to move back home was a conversation with an alum. And so I was talking to Fred Zwanica, the founder of Africa's Leadership Academy. And I spoke to him, I'm like, hey, Fred, I'm looking to do this. And I had all the reasons, the same reasons you hear all the time, like, oh, go home when you're ready, go home when you have enough experience, go home when you have enough money. And so I told Fred the same thing. I was like, yeah, but maybe I work at Google for a couple of years and get some payments experience and then go home. And Fred just looked at me and started laughing. And he said something like, he's like, what do you have to lose? I was like, look, I don't have the money right now. Then he says, look where you went to school. And I was like, okay. And he's like, how much money do you need? I said, maybe $20,000 to $30,000. And he starts laughing even more. And I was like, why are you laughing? He's like, have you not asked your friends to invest into your business? And I was like, yo, like, first of all, like, I'm not trying to make my friends, like my investor, it's going to be awkward. This is a dynamic shift. Like, I'm trying to hang out with my friends, or if I go to Tahoe and they see me chilling and not working, it's like weird. I lose that. And he just looks at me, he's like, stop. He says, that means you don't believe in your business. And he said, us as Africans, often we chip in for weddings, we chip in for funerals, and come together for that. Why don't we do that for our own businesses? Why can't we support each other financially? But it also is getting out there and putting your name on the line for the business that you want to operate in. And so when I told him that, he says, you think Africa Leadership Academy would exist today if it wasn't for me asking a few peers for $500 here, $1,000 there, $10,000 here? And that really motivated me. That really encouraged me, right? And so for me, when I moved back home, that was the mentality I had to bring. And I had to look for people, lots of cold emails, lots of reaching out to people who are experts in the industry just to understand. And I would ask them the same 4 questions. I would ask them, what do you wish you knew when you started? What are the patterns of the trends that you're seeing the business going into today? If you were to start today, like, what would you focus on primarily? And then, what are other patterns that you're seeing, or like, who are the other people? Within that 30-minute conversation, I gained like 5 years of insight. And I do that to East Africa, I do that in West Africa, I do that in Southeast Asia, and I do that in South America. And I try to identify patterns. And you start to see things, but there is no shortcuts with talking to users and customers. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing in my opinion. But the insights you can gain from these mentors is unmatched.
Thank you so much for that perspective. I really love the direct questions and getting to the point and getting what you need. Now we have some audience questions. I'm really excited. It's directed specifically at some of the other panelists. So I'll start off with Tosin. This question is from Olubemi, and it is, how do you balance the need for innovation and adopting global best practices with adapting to local market realities?
Okay. So I think, like we've talked about, it's important to know your market and context, and to understand the complexities. I think in terms of bringing innovation, you would have to test at the end of the day, and you can test in bits. A good example is, and I really like this example, Max, for instance, the ride-hailing company in Nigeria. And even though, yes, they did ban Okadas in Lagos, they've been able to pivot to logistics, and now they're in other states as well. And if you just think about what Max is doing, it's pretty much like, we already had Okadas before, and we still have like individual fragmented Okadas. But what they've really done is just bring them under the umbrella. So introduce this product to them, this ride-hailing product to them. And how they introduced it to them, they had some value adds. And what were their value adds? One is training. A lot of these Okada drivers are not trained. I mean, I've had so many like staff that quit, and then next thing I see them just driving Okadas, and I know they have no training, because that's not what they were doing when they were working for me. So they had a lot of value add, which made sense to the consumer and sense to the riders. So one was training, Two was insurance. A lot of these guys have never heard of insurance. They've never had health insurance. This was a value add for them. The third was credit. A lot of these guys don't have access to credit. Some of them underbanked. Some of them even never had bank accounts, and now they can access credit for them to buy these bikes and work with Max and possibly own it at some point. So yes, as much as you're bringing the innovation, think about the local context and see if you can adopt it as a value add that makes sense and transform the lives of the people that will be using it, one, and your business people.
Yeah, great advice. Rue, on to you. We're talking about investors now. So someone said the rationale we often hear about the funding gap is the challenge of investment readiness on the part of the businesses. Is this still the case?
No, I don't think so. I think the challenge is that investors don't know how to invest in businesses that aren't ready. And so I think that in the end, everything is about managing risk. And, if you look at the question that came earlier, the question is, what do you do at the earliest stages to get your business up and running? And the answer to that question, and the biggest threat, I think, to those businesses is sort of what I call survival economics, which is most people can't take the 6 months of sweat away from a job that it takes to make something succeed and grow. And so that luxury doesn't exist in many of the economies that we have. If you had a friends and family round, which Benjamin was sort of describing, and you had a sophisticated economy of friends and family investors who knew how to invest and manage their risk for businesses that don't have the perfect investment readiness, you would see more businesses make decisions, more entrepreneurs make decisions to go and launch their own startup than go and join a corporate and have a comfy job. Right. And so in my mind, I think we put too much, while it's really important to have investment readiness, I think we also really need to focus on having trained, professionalized angel and friends and family investment, because they're real networks. I mean, you went to Stanford. Stanford has an amazing friends and family network that I'm sure you can talk to, Benjamin, let alone the peers that you studied with. And they know how to invest. They know how to manage their risk. Given the fact these businesses don't have the perfect bow on top of their business plan or their model, or they don't have the perfect MVP, they know to handle that situation. And I think that's something that's missing in Africa and it's really needed. So I always actually find that, as you can tell, always start with what can investors and what can the ecosystem do more to support the entrepreneur, rather than what do we need to make the entrepreneur to do more to engage the ecosystem.
So this is a question I would like each and everyone to answer. I'm going to start with Tosin, then Benjamin, then Rue to answer this. So especially for the people who work with multiple entrepreneurs, what are the most common mistakes you see? And how do we surpass them? And for Benjamin, who is his own entrepreneur, what's the worst mistake you made or that you're willing to share and how you learned from it? So Tosin, we'll start from you.
Okay, awesome. Mistakes that entrepreneurs make. So I can think of two. One, I would say hiring and firing for your vision. And what do I mean by that? So there's some people will be valuable to you when you start your business. However, as you evolve, these people might not necessarily grow with you. And it's very important that you identify that and make difficult, hard decisions of, I don't want to say letting them go, but just understanding that where you're going, especially if you're thinking big and you're thinking about scaling and multiplying your impact, you have to understand that the people who started with you might not be the people who would evolve with you and grow with you as you get to the next stage. So that's one. The second would be growing too fast. And I've had a few conversations where people and people outside the African market or people outside the Nigerian market, and they would say to me, I don't understand why this entrepreneur is expanding to other countries when Nigeria has a bigger market and they haven't conquered Nigeria yet. So to someone on the outside, it doesn't make sense if you say your product, the Nigerian market for your product, say, is about 16 million people. but then you want to expand to South Africa and you want to expand to other countries. And then if you do like the math, it doesn't really add up to the current market in Nigeria. And then the entrepreneurs say, well, investors like that, you know, they want you to expand, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, it's been a challenge for some people, just growing too fast and expanding too fast without actually conquering your home market.
Benjamin?
Yeah, so I have a lot, but I think I 100% agree with you, Tosin. I think the hiring piece is fundamental. I think people outgrow certain stages of companies, and if somebody's at the company at an early stage, like doesn't mean, hey, can y'all hear me all right? Am I frozen? Am I back? Okay, cool. I think people outgrow companies, and so there's certain stages of companies that when the company evolves, that person may not be the best fit to lead that role anymore, and having that tough conversation with them is a tough one. I would say the biggest one I personally see as well, because I speak to a lot of founders within the region, is speaking to customers. You'd be surprised how little a lot of founders speak to their customers, and I think you start off by speaking to a lot of customers, and then when the business grows and evolves, like we tend to forget or shift away. And I think that is something that becomes really dangerous, because then the product is just building every single thing. It's not about building the most features. It's about, okay, what is the most important thing to serve that customer? What do people actually need? Mistakes that we made, I think the biggest one, so in 2019, so we built two products. So our first product was a domestic payments solution in Tanzania and Uganda. Our biggest challenge we faced was kind of with growth. So we grew from, I think, 30,000 to 250,000 in a year and a half, just within Tanzania. So managing payment volumes, managing people tuning into the platform on the first platform we built. That was really, really tough, because we just thought, okay, solution is hire somebody for this role. And, I think almost everybody we hired within that time period, we let go because it just wasn't the right fit. And I think when that was happening, it was just like these growing pains, and you ask your investors, okay, what do we do? And like, oh, just hire somebody. And you go quickly with the hiring. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of us, including myself, have made. And now I'm extremely picky with our hiring. And, we are 9 people now from 7 different countries, primarily African. And quick plug is we're actually looking to hire a growth lead in the UK. So if you're somebody interested, ping me afterwards. But we're really picky with the hiring now. And what's led for us is also bringing extremely good quality onto our team. So our CTO now, we used to be an engineer at Monzo, one of the early employees at Monzo Digital Bank in the UK. And being able to convince people like them to join, we've been really picky with, our choices. So I think Tosin's 100% right with the hiring piece, and I just want to really endorse that again.
Rue, would love to hear from you, but great advice so far. Hire, but be very smart about it. Make sure the team is very important, and keep talking to customers no matter what stage of the business you're in. Don't get comfortable. You're serving them. That's what you're there for. So Rue, would love to hear from you.
Well, I agree with what everyone else has said, so I'm going to add 2 others rather than repeat. But I totally agree, team. In the end, businesses are just collections of people. No matter how sophisticated the technology is, it's just about people. Every business should be human-centric, is a human-centric. So the 2 I will add is focus. And there's a lot of hustling and a lot of side hustling and a lot of distractions. And actually, I think that, being an entrepreneur is just about relentlessness. And when we look for entrepreneurs, we look for that relentlessness and that focus and that dedication. So I think that's very, very important to show. And the second one is a funny one. It's equity. And what I mean by equity is really understanding where you are in your growth. I have businesses that come and apply to us at C stage, thinking they're Series A. And giving me valuations at 15 million or 20 million. And it's not just a negotiation issue. It's just a sort of shows a lack of understanding of where you are in your journey. And we look for entrepreneurs and CEOs who understand where they are in their growth journey. And so really understanding, what valuation you should have, what stage you have, but also like what I find really interesting particularly about working in Africa, is that equity feels like cash where it's not. it's aspirational, right? And so I find myself negotiating of over 10 basis points or 0.5% or 1%. And I sort of want to say, like, by the time you become a unicorn, you're not going to care that you gave away those 50 basis points. Like, you're like, don't walk away from a deal because of that. Like, have, you know, like, don't fight over it so hard. So knowing where you are and knowing how to do a deal, I think is something that's very important.
Absolutely. Be realistic, but know your worth. That is great. So I have a question that either Tosin or Rue can take. And this is a very personal question. I think it hurts a lot of people on this call. I would say, especially Nigeria. Okay, when investments are made in Africa, how do you curtail the effects of currency devaluation and inflation on your business planning? Because you're operating on an international scale. Now, when I applied for the Said MBA, the naira was worth twice what it's worth right now. So that I feel this question on a personal level. So Rue, Tosin, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs in different parts of Africa. They have to calculate net present value. How do they do it?
I'm going to pass this to Rue. Rue's going to answer this one.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. So I'm not quite sure if that question has been asked from the entrepreneur's perspective or from the investor's perspective, and they're quite different. From the entrepreneur's perspective, you obviously want to raise your capital into the currency in the location that you're in. And from an investor's perspective, you want to try and invest in a country that has stable currency. And in that is conflict, right? Because you want to be able to pay your expenses and your operation costs in your local currency. Investors want the security of being able to invest in international currency. Again, my hope, and most of the businesses now that we look at hedge, right? So most of the businesses we look at have both a local operating base and an international, usually often in Delaware investment base. And so unfortunately, I think the burden falls onto the entrepreneur, which I think is deeply unfair. And I think investors need to sort of, again, the risk should be on the entrepreneur's shoulders, not on the investor's shoulders, not on the entrepreneur's shoulders. And I think it's up to the entrepreneur to convince the investor of that. But it's very challenging. But there are entrepreneurs who really convinced me that, you know, we should be investing locally and keep that currency locally. And we have persuaded our LPs that we might have to take a long-term time frame about how we repatriate that money. You know, in the end, you can manage your investment and your returns if you don't have to repatriate it at a specific date on a specific timescale. So again, I think investors can manage that risk better than entrepreneurs can, and should have to do so as well.
Well, thank you so much. So we have only 5.
And just to add to that, I was just going to go back and say, I had talked about entrepreneurs expanding to other countries. And to be fair, one of the reasons why they actually expand is because of currency devaluation. Because when they go to other countries, then they are able to earn with a much more valuable currency than the naira. So unfortunately, that's our reality in Nigeria. So.
Yeah, I noticed when Rue was answering the question, Tosin and I were laughing, but I understood the laugh.
Yeah.
Laugh of pain.
Yeah. So it is a laugh of pain. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to have one last question for Benjamin and then one last question for everyone to answer just very, very quickly. So Benjamin, the last question goes to you. What advice would you give a prospective founder looking to return home and engage in a new venture with relatively high capital requirements when funding from family and friends just isn't enough?
This is a really good question. Initially, I thought we needed a ton of money when we were starting. I moved back in June 2017, and my first year was just scrambling around. And I was sitting at home and I was seeing all my friends living their best lives in San Francisco, going out, enjoying themselves. I'm here in Dar es Salaam, power cuts and everything. I felt some type of way for sure. But then when we launched our product in April 2018, it took a while, right? So the first 6-7 months were just trying to figure stuff out, trying to figure what's going on. In December 2018, we get into Y Combinator. By the way, we applied to Y Combinator 6 times. Okay, I applied to Y Combinator since I was in school. And most people say like, oh, the Nala, they just got into YC just like that. I'm like, yo, you have no idea how many times I've been applying for this thing, but cool, we moved. Anyway, we get into Y Combinator. And by this time, we were doing, I think, $300,000 a month in monthly volume. And when we get there, one of the partners at Y Combinator pulls me on the side. He says, one of the main reasons why we brought you in was because out of all the companies we've had in our company history since 2005, y'all had spent the least amount of money and had the most traction. And we had only spent $17,000 for a year and a half of work, right? And so for us, it was just like, okay, how can we be really scrappy? How can we be really cheap? Like, okay, I moved back home. I stayed in my mom's house. I was eating free food. That East African pilau is better than jollof rice. We'll park that for now. There's free Wi-Fi at home. But what are my other costs, right? Maybe transportation, you know, and being able to pay to go to some meetings here and there. But my costs were minimal because like even storage is free online on AWS for like your first 10,000 credits or something like that. So it's really asking yourself, okay, how much do you truly need? And then working out your budget from there, because sometimes we assume we need a lot more money than we actually do just to get a basic product out as simple as possible and being super cheap and scrappy, which my team knows me for, not in many good ways and some in bad ways, but like, they're like, oh, Benji, do we have to be this cheap? I'm like, yeah. But yeah, that was our piece of my advice for funding.
Thank you so much. So last question, we only have a minute left. So I just want one line from everyone, just one line of advice, like golden real advice that we're not going to get anywhere else. And then I'll let you go. So we're going to start off with Tosin. Then Rue.
Okay, awesome. One last advice, just have the right team. Surround yourself with experts and innovators, and listen to them and help them, support them to implement, and hire and fire for your vision. Think big.
Thank you. Rue?
Beware of toxic optimism. It's hard. It's really, really hard. I've been working in Africa for 20 years, and the Africa Rising thesis has been there for 20 years, and I'm not sure if it's risen yet. So what that is to say is nothing negative, but it just means it's hard, but you can really be successful. Anyone can make it. You just need to be relentless, you know, and it's unfair. But it does take an extra hustle. I think hustle is a positive word in my world. But you can do it. And there are systems out there to make you do it. So know your market and know your ecosystem.
Thank you so much. Benjamin, keep it brief. Give it to us. Last line.
Mine is what I tell my team. If you don't take responsibility, you take orders. And I don't want to give orders. And so whatever you're trying to work on, like, take responsibility of it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye. Have a great day.